All right, this morning we will be concluding our series in Leviticus. We did it. We did it. We're here. We made it. Yeah, don't get too, that's a little too much enthusiasm, okay? Max, calm down. Calm down. You're a little too excited. Yeah, no, we're excited. I'm excited. We're wrapping it up here, and we'll be doing a Christmas series through December. But as we wrap up Leviticus, we're going to be in Leviticus chapter 27. We're going to be talking about vows. These are some laws about vows and some instructions from God about vows. Now, it's kind of a little funny for us, I think, because it's not a typical part of most of our American religious experience is making vows. And so I wanted to kind of intro and we'll also conclude with this story of Jephthah, who I will be calling Jeff for most of this. But this story occurs in Judges chapter 11. And Jephthah, Jeff is from Gilead. He's a Gileadite. Gilead was a region that was occupied by the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. And Jeff was a mighty warrior. He was a really strong, good warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. And so he was an illegitimate son of his father. He lived in his father's house. And his legitimate brothers kind of kick him out of the house. They kind of kick him out. They say, you're not part of this. You don't get the inheritance, all that kind of thing. They kind of send him away. And he kind of goes away. But then Gilead is faced with the threat of invasion by the Ammonites, a Canaanite tribe. They're ready to come and invade the Ammonites. And the Gileadites are getting kind of scared of this. And they're like, you know what? We need Jeff. Jeff is a mighty warrior. He can lead us in battle. He's the guy that we need to come lead us. But they got to go find him. So they go find him and they ask him, like, hey, we know that we kind of kicked you out, but we really need you. We need you, buddy. You're the rock. You're the guy. Like, you're the tough guy. We need you to come back and lead us in battle. And Jeff makes a very shrewd deal. He says, like, okay, I'll come back and I'll lead you in battle. But if we win, I get to be the chief. I get to be the head of all Gilead. I get to be in charge if we win. Puts it all on the line. Puts it all on the line. He can defeat the Ammonites. But then he goes and tries to negotiate with the Ammonites, try to see if hey, what if I can just end this before we ever have to fight? It doesn't go well. It doesn't work out for him. And so now he knows war is imminent and he wants to kind of secure the victory. And so he makes a deal with God. He makes a vow to God. We see this in Judges chapter 11. 30 through 31, Jephthah made a vow to Yahweh and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be Yahweh's. I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So Jeff, he's basically listen, God, if we win and I get to go back home, because I think he knows it's either win and go home or die on the battlefield. It's if I get to go back home, whatever I see, whatever comes out first, whatever sheep or goat or whoever comes out to meet me as I come home, I'm going to offer it up as a burnt offering on the altar. He makes this vow. So now let's get some context for this. What are the laws concerning these vows like Jeff made here? So Leviticus chapter 27, we'll look first at verses 1 through 13. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, if anyone makes a special vow to Yahweh involving the valuation of persons, then the valuation of a male from 20 years old up to 60 years old shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. If the person is a female, the valuation shall be 30 shekels. If the person is from 5 years old up to 20 years old, the valuation shall be for a male 20 shekels and for a female 10 shekels. If the person is from a month old up to 5 years old, the valuation shall be for a male 5 shekels of silver, and for a female, the valuation shall be 3 shekels of silver. If the person is 60 years old or over, the valuation for a male shall be 15 shekels, for a female 10 shekels. If someone is too poor to pay the valuation, then he shall be made to stand before the priest, and the priest shall value him. The priest shall value him according to what the vower can afford. If the vow is an animal that may be offered as an offering to Yahweh, all of it that he gives to Yahweh is holy. He shall not exchange it or make a substitute for it, good or for bad, or bad for good. And if he does, in fact, substitute one animal for another, then both it and the substitute shall be holy. If it is any unclean animal that may not be offered as an offering to Yahweh, then he shall stand the animal before the priest. The priest shall value it as either good or bad. As the priest values it, so it shall be. But if he wishes to redeem it, he shall add a fifth to the valuation. Okay, so first we see these special vows. And again, I don't think this is a common part of our religious experience. So what is a special vow? It's an oath by which one binds oneself to take a specified course of action. Any Israelite could make a vow. Anybody can make this vow. No one is commanded to take a vow. They seem to be common in the Middle East. This seems to be something that God assumes that they will do. But interestingly, throughout all of the Old Testament, we never see God encourage it. He's just kind of like, it seems like they're going to do it anyway. If they're going to do it, they need to do it this way. Okay? If they're going to do it, he doesn't necessarily want them to do it. He's not encouraging them to make these vows. But if they're going to do it, then they should do it in this specific way. It made me think of doing the dishes at my house. Okay? So I'm the one that does the dishes at my house. By my choice. I enjoy it. I like it. I put a podcast on or something like that, and it's some nice me time. Okay, doing the dishes. I like it. Okay? So I don't encourage anyone else to do it. But if they're going to do it, they need to load the dishwasher my way. Okay? And honestly, if they don't, I unload it and do it again. I'll rearrange it and I'll just it makes no sense. I'll open it and I'll be like, this is chaos. I don't know what anyone was thinking when they put this in here, including my wife. She didn't know how to do it either. Right? I'm like, so I don't encourage them to do it, but if they were going to do it, I could write a manual. It would probably be as long as Leviticus. But they need to do it the way that I do. Okay? So that's, I think, kind of what is here, because I think that God's not saying this is really influencing him that much. I don't think that these vows are influencing him. I think that as we go back to our guy Jeff, when he comes and he's like, God, if you give me victory over the Ammonites, then I'll do this thing. I don't think God was like, oh, in that case, a burnt offering of anything. Well, gosh, I was going to let the Ammonites win, but I don't think that's how God works. I think God already knew what the victory, what the outcome of the battle was going to be. But I think he does care that he's like, if you're going to do this, if in prayer you're going to tell me that you're going to do something, if I do something for you, then if that's what happens, you better fulfill your side of it. You better fulfill your side of it. So that's what we see here. We see these laws for these vows, even though they're not encouraged, it seems to be what people want to do. So he's going to give them, they need to fulfill them if they're going to do them, and they need to do them in this specific way. So first we see there are two types of vows. There's unconditional vows, first off. Unconditional vows are vows that are just made, it includes vowing to live according to certain standards, to take a defined course of action, to maintain loyalty. Examples of these vows we see in Scripture are, I give you two examples. One is the vow of the Nazirite, which you can read about in Numbers chapter 6 if you want to. I don't have time to go into all that right now, but it's a good thing if you wanted to look at it later this week. We see a vow in which someone just says, hey, I'm going to live by these standards, I'm going to do these things, and it's not like Jeff's vow. Jeff's vow is a conditional vow. Conditional vow is, if God will do this thing for me, then I will do this thing. They're vows made out of desperation for God's intervention. And it's really a form of prayer revealing how desperate someone is, that, hey, God, if you'll come through for me in the situation, then I will do this extra special thing for you. I'll do something for you that's extra above and beyond everything that I am already commanded to do, already need to do. So the first section of this passage then deals with the valuation of people. which I know by this point you're pretty calloused by Leviticus, but I think probably was a little uncomfortable, right? You're like, he's valuing people now. That's nothing compared to what we've been through, but it's still a little uncomfortable being like, oh, this person is worth this much and this person's worth this much. But here's what that's about. So the reason that he's giving these valuations is because an Israelite might vow themselves to God's service. They might say, like, God, if you do this, then I will serve you. Maybe unconditionally, maybe for a certain period of time, but they might make a vow in that way in which they're committing themselves. And what that usually meant was that they would then go to the tabernacle or go to the temple later and say to the priests, I vowed myself to God. God came through for me, so here I am. They might also do that with their children. They might also say, like, I'm going to vow this child of mine. And so they might bring the child and say, like, I made a vow that my child would serve in the temple. If God came through for me, God came through for me. So here's my child. He's here to serve in the temple. But a couple situations might come up, right? They might be that the person goes like, I made that vow and I don't want to do it. Right? I don't want to do it, or I don't want to do it for as long as I said I would do it. And so they might want a way out of it. They might want to come to the priest and say, listen, I made this vow, but I don't actually want to come do it. Can I pay the valuation price? Right? It might also be that they would come to the temple or the tabernacle and say, like, hey, I devoted myself, here I am to work. And the priest might be like, we don't really have anything for you. We don't really need you here. We've got enough people already. We don't really need you to do that. Could you pay the valuation price instead? That's really the more common expected thing here. The expectation would be that you would come ready to serve, but that the priest might say, we don't really need your service. Can you pay the valuation price instead? So that's why the valuation price, and if we see it's based on age and gender, basically, and it's basically based on, for the average Israelite, how much work they could expect from the person. How much physical manual labor, right? And again, the average man is stronger than the average woman. And so they would expect to get more physical labor out of a man in his prime than they would out of a woman or out of a child or out of an elderly person. Now, I'm not saying 60 is elderly. That's what the Bible said, okay? That's not me. Again, we have to remember these are not my evaluations. These are God's. Okay, so he's saying that after 60, they're like, hey, we'll expect less work from you. So that's all this is about. This is not about intrinsic value. This is about the amount of physical labor you could expect from a person in that time period as well. There's also, remember, this work is only physical work. There's not like, well, you're not going to come to the priest and be like, can you use me like on the computers? Right? They don't have that. Right? This is like slaughtering animals, cleaning up after animals, cleaning the temple, all these different things they might be doing, helping with hauling stuff, whatever, all these different kinds of physical labor type things. So these are the valuations. Now, interestingly, he provides a stipulation for the poor, right? He says that if the person comes, says, I'm here to work, and the priest says, we don't really need you. We have enough workers right now. Could you pay the valuation price? And they go like, but I can't pay the valuation price. The valuation price is high, right? Even all of them are high, even the lowest amounts, because 1 shekel was equivalent to 1 month's wages for an average worker. So even for a child, 3 or 5 shekels, that's 3 or 5 months of wages. That's a lot. It's a lot of money, right? So this is not an insignificant amount of money that you would be asking. So the person might say, like, I don't have 50 shekels. I can't pay the valuation price. And so then the priest, in speaking with the person and talking with them, he could figure out what could they afford. Everybody has to pay something, but he provides this stipulation for the poor that the priest can kind of discern and figure out where to set that price at, and they can pay that instead. What we see here again because we've seen this before, where God provides a means for the poor to have access to the tabernacle, have access to his grace. He's providing grace and mercy to the poor. It's not about how much they can afford, it's about their willingness to come. So he provides access to all to come to his presence. We'll look next here at verses 14 through 25, holy gifts. When a man dedicates his house as a holy gift to Yahweh, the priest shall value it as either good or bad. As the priest values it, so it shall stand. And if the donor wishes to redeem his house, he shall add a fifth of the valuation price, and it shall be his. If a man dedicates to Yahweh part of the land that is his possession, then the valuation shall be in proportion to its seed. A homer of barley shall be valued at 50 shekels of silver. If he dedicates his field in the year of Jubilee, the valuation shall stand. But if he dedicates his field after the Jubilee, then the priest shall calculate the price according to the years that remain until the year of Jubilee, and the dedication shall be made from the valuation. And if he who dedicates the field wishes to redeem it, he shall add a fifth of it to its valuation price, and it shall remain his. But if he does not wish to redeem the field, or if he has sold the field to another man, it shall not be redeemed anymore. But the field, when it is released in the Jubilee, shall be a holy gift to Yahweh, like a field that has been devoted. The priest shall be in possession of it. If he dedicates to Yahweh a field that he has bought, that which is not part of his possession, then the priest shall calculate the number of the valuation for it up to the year of Jubilee, and the man shall give the valuation on that day as a holy gift to Yahweh. In the year of Jubilee, the field shall return to him from whom it was bought, to whom the land belongs as a possession. Every valuation shall be according to the shekel of the sanctuary. 20 gerahs shall make a shekel. So the Israelites could dedicate houses to Yahweh if they wanted to give it to the priests for their use. They could dedicate a house, and the priest would value it at the beginning and say, here's how much this house is worth. This is what the valuation price. They would give the house, and that price would be for if the person decided they want to take it back. If they wanted to redeem it, they could pay that price plus 20%. They could pay that price plus 20% and get the house back. The same thing for land. The land value was based on the amount of seed that it would take to sow the field. And again, the field could be redeemed by adding a fifth to the valuation price. We also see additional rules about the year of Jubilee here, that again, those rules apply, that the field would go back to the original owners, so that price would be based on how many years are left till the Jubilee. Now, we might ask, why do the Israelites have the option of redeeming property that has been dedicated to Yahweh? Well, we might see that some might have been overzealous in the moment of dedication. They might decide, like, you know what, yeah, I want to give this to Yahweh, and then they might decide, like, oh, maybe not, I want it back. Or life circumstances might change in which they needed it back, like maybe they are adding to their family, a son or daughter gets married, and they want to give some of the land to them to start their family. They might need to get it back. But their dedication is already in. So they can get it back, but they need to pay that valuation price. They need to pay the price plus 20% essentially for the priest's trouble. It's like you've already decided you're going to give this to God. You're going to give it to God either as land, as a house, or you're going to pay this price for that. That's what the valuation that the priests are making is for that redemption. But the possibility of return would encourage the people to donate what they have, even if they can only give it for a short period of time, right? You might decide, like, we're not going to plant this field this year. We're just not going to get around to it or whatever. I'm going to give it to the priests, let them plant it, let them have it, and then I can redeem it next year. Right there. But it encourages them to give whatever they can. And it kind of reminds me of like the way that I talk about encouraging people to help at Wednesday Club. Like, I say, hey, we're here from 2 to 6. Anytime you want to give, anytime you want to come, if you can come for an hour, come for a half hour, if you can come at the end and help clean up, whatever you can do, come and give what you can. And that's essentially what they're saying here, is encouraging them to give what they can to God. Look lastly here at verses 26 through 34. Devotion. But a firstborn of animals, which as a firstborn belongs to Yahweh, no man may dedicate. Whether ox or sheep, it is Yahweh's. If it is an unclean animal, then he shall buy it back at the valuation and add a fifth to it. Or if it is not redeemed, it shall be sold at the valuation. But no devoted thing that a man devotes to Yahweh of anything that he has, whether man or beast or as inherited field, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing is most holy to Yahweh. No one devoted who is devoted for destruction from mankind shall be ransomed. He shall surely be put to death. Every tithe of land, whether of the seed of the land or the fruit of the trees, is Yahweh's. It is holy to Yahweh. If a man wishes to redeem some of his tithe, he shall add a fifth to it, and every tithe of herds or flocks, every 10th animal of all that pass under the herdsman's staff shall be holy to Yahweh. One shall not differentiate between good or bad, neither shall he make a substitute for it. If he does not substitute for it, then both it and the substitute shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. These are the commandments that Yahweh commanded Moses for the people of Israel on Mount Sinai. So the first thing he addresses here is this idea of the firstborn. The Israelites had already been commanded to dedicate their firstborn to the Lord, from whether they're humans or whether they're animals. We see this in Exodus chapter 13, verse 2. Yahweh said to Moses, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whether it is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both man and of beast is mine." They already had to do that. They couldn't get extra credit, right? They don't get to double up on this. They can't go like, you know what, God, I'm going to dedicate the firstborn to you, like pretty special, because I already expected that. I already commanded that, in fact. You don't get to get extra credit, double credit on this, because you've already are supposed to do this. I kind of think that is the situation with most of the to the extent that we as American Christians make vows, I feel like most of the time it's that. Most of the time you see somebody that goes God, if you come through for me, then I'm going to start going to church regularly. And if you come through for me, then I'll start reading my Bible. Or if you come through for me, then I'm going to start praying. And I feel like God's got to just be thinking oh, if I come through for you, you're going to do the things I already expect you to do? Thank you. Right? No, that's what you're already expected to do. And that's what he's really saying in this verse with this section on the firstborn. Is you can't dedicate that as extra. You already are supposed to do that. And so often that's where we're in those situations where we're dedicating things or promising things that we're already meant to be doing in response to what he has done for us, which is so far above and beyond that. We also see this stipulation about unclean animals, that unclean animals couldn't be sacrificed, but even the firstborn of those, they were to come and give to the priests. They would not be sacrificed, and these would be animals like camels, mules, right, things like that they could possibly be used by the priest. They might say oh good, we need that for our daily life. We need to be able to move stuff around or whatever else. We need pack animals. We need those things, we're going to keep them. Or they could bring them, say we're dedicating this to you, and the priest could say do you want to redeem it? Do you want to get it back? You can pay the valuation price plus 20%. Or the person could choose not to. They could say, no, I don't want to. You keep it. And then the priest could just sell it for the valuation price to somebody else. Right, so they have that law in there. Then we see in verse 28 a new verb introduced here, this idea of devoted, right? That some things are devoted. Previously in this passage, they've used the word dedicated. And what we're seeing here is two categories of giving something to God. You could dedicate something to God, or you could devote something to God. And that devoted was irredeemable, right? They could not take that back. They could not sell it. It was devoted, totally, irrevocably given to God. We've talked about before when we talk about the tabernacle, right, that the tabernacle space was holy ground, that this was holy space, that the things in the tabernacle were holy. But there was a place inside the tabernacle behind the veil where the Ark of the Covenant rested. That was the most holy place, or some translations say the Holy of Holies. Right, so we have the most holy place, and then we have holy places. And that's really the difference, the equivalent difference here between dedicated and devoted. that dedicated things were holy, devoted things were most holy. It was this extra level. So if you devoted something, you could not get it back. It was irrevocably God's. We see an example of this in a vow made by Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 10 through 11. So she was deeply distressed and prayed to Yahweh and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow saying, O Yahweh of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a son, then I will give him to Yahweh all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. She's referring to there at the end that no razor touches his head is a reference to the vow of the Nazarite. But here she's making this vow to God, and it's irrevocable, right? She's saying all the days of her life. She doesn't allow for any contingencies. She's saying he will serve God all the days of his life. He is going to go and irrevocably, she's devoting him to God. We also see in verse 29 a different kind of devotion, and he references human beings who are devoted for destruction. Now, he's not talking about human sacrifice here. He's talking about those who incur the death penalty for their actions, right? So that if someone commits a crime, and there are a lot of crimes, as we've gone through Leviticus, that require the death penalty under the law of Moses. If that person is then devoted for destruction because of what they have done, they cannot be redeemed. He's kind of telling them they can't pay a price and get out of that. They are devoted to destruction. They're going to incur that penalty. We see an example of that in Exodus. I don't remember what verse or what chapter. But whoever sacrifices to any god other than Yahweh alone shall be devoted to destruction. He's talking about the death penalty there. Death penalty is used extensively through the law of Moses because God was holding Israel to a very high standard. He's doing something unique with Israel. They're being held to a very high standard. We also see in this passage that the Israelites have been commanded to give a tenth of their crops to God, right? They're commanded to tithe, right? We call that tithing, that they have to give a tenth of their crops to God. Every 10th animal they're to give to God. And it says if they would rather keep this portion of their crops, again, they could redeem it. If they go, I'd really rather have the crops, they could pay the price for the crops plus 20%. He also talks about there not being any substitutes for what has been dedicated or devoted to God, that whatever they promise they should do. It doesn't matter if the substitute is better or worse. So what is this situation? What might this look like? You might have an Israelite herdsman. He's got a sheep herd. He's got a sheep who has not been having offspring, has not been having babies. And he might pray to God and say, like, God, if you will grant this sheep fertility, and this sheep has babies, the first one that comes out, I'm going to give to you. Okay? So then it happens, right? The sheep, it gets pregnant. It's going to have babies. It's going to have 3? I don't know about sheep. That seems, is that 3? Probably good. It's not 8. And it's more than 1. So let's say 3. Let's say 3. It's going to have 3 babies. First one that comes out is going to be for God. That's what he has promised. He's already vowed that. First one's going to be for God. It doesn't matter if that first one is the worst or the best. That's the one that should go to God. If it's the best one, they can't substitute it and take a worse one. If it's the worst, that's the runt, they can't decide, no, you know what, I want to give God the best. God said, you made this deal, you're going to just give what you said you were going to give. No substitutes. Let's go back to Jephthah here. When we left off in Jeph's story, he had made this vow to Yahweh that he would give him, if he gave him victory over the Ammonites, he would give him whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be Yahweh's. I'll offer it up for a burnt offering. Again, we see that his expectation there is that it will be an animal. He's saying he wants to give a burnt offering. But if we keep reading, we see the fruition of the vow. Verse 32, Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and Yahweh gave them into his hand. He struck them from Aror to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities as far as Abel Keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. God came through for Jephthah. Now it's time for him to hold up his end of the vow. Verse 34, Jephthah came to his home in Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. As soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble for me. For I opened my mouth to Yahweh, and I cannot take back my vow. He vowed, whatever comes out of my house to greet me. And again, because he said burnt offering, he's assuming it was going to be an animal. He's assuming a little goat or something was going to come up, and he was going to go, oh, come on, right? Like, he's going to be excited, but his daughter is so excited that he comes home. She comes out to greet him first with dances and tambourines. She's so excited, and he realizes, I made this vow, and now I have to give her into the service of the temple. And again, he's not going to sacrifice her in the sense that he would sacrifice an animal, but the fact that that he said burnt offering implies this total devotion, that she would then be totally devoted to the temple service for the rest of her life. And so he's going to take her, and she's going to become devoted to the temple service for the rest of her life. And he does it. He comes through. If you read the rest of the story in Judges 11. But what this reminds me of is really what we are called to be, right? In the same way that she was called to be this total offering, totally devoted to God, it's what the Apostle Paul calls us to in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, where he says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. God encourages us to be totally devoted to him, to be a living sacrifice. Just as the sacrifices are made in Leviticus, we are to be a total sacrifice to him. We are to be a burnt offering, but not burned up, a living offering, our total lives devoted to him because of what he's done for us, because Jesus came for us, as we'll celebrate here in December, that he came, took on human flesh, that he lived a perfect life, that he was sinless, and that he died on the cross on our behalf, that we might find forgiveness of sins, that we might have peace with God if we just accept him as our Savior and our Lord. We turn our lives over to him, become that living sacrifice because of what he has done for us. Not to earn our forgiveness, but because of what he has done for us. We'll wrap up with this, 3 takeaways for today's message. Number 1, take your vows seriously. If you're going to make vows to God, fulfill them. Take them seriously. Do what you've said you will do. Number 2, give what you can to God. I think that's what he's really encouraging them to do in that middle section where he's talking about gifts that they might give to God. He says, give what you can. Give what you can for whatever time you can. Give what you can in response to what he has done for you. And lastly, devote yourself to God as a living sacrifice. So every part of who you are, everything that you do, be devoted to him. Would you pray with me now? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the fact that you gave us these instructions, that you did this amazing thing with Israel where you made them your people, you called them to live in these ways, and now you call us to live for you. I pray that we would give you what we can, that we would respond to what you have done for us by living as a sacrifice, by totally devoting ourselves to you. Pray these things in the blessed name of Jesus. Amen.